Today, we're going to use and define sets in all sorts of ways. We're going to see exactly what makes sets tick and compare sets with other Tableau features and see how they are different and how they are better or worse for some applications you may be interested in. My goal is for you to leave this session feeling fully empowered and ready to use sets in your analysis. Right? If you have never used sets before, this session is for you. Right? Hopefully, I want you to leave here feeling ready to jump on with sets in your next question. Now, if you have used sets before, this may be a review for you as an FYI. So before we get started, I have a question. Who here has been at a TC, a Tableau conference before? Awesome. All right. Well, this question split this room into two groups of people, right? People that have been, people that haven't been at TC. And I can keep asking questions, right? I can keep asking, okay, who's been using Tableau more than 6 months? Who loves, not just likes, loves, yes, thank you, sir. Who loves coffee? And if I can pick arbitrary seat numbers in this room, right? And this would split this room into two groups. And this fundamental idea of splitting a population into groups based on similar and dissimilar characteristics is at the core of what makes sets powerful and simple to use. So to demonstrate that power, we're going to look at 3 data sets today. We're going to briefly see some data from an airplane traveling from Seattle to New Orleans earlier this week, and see how sets sometimes hide right in plain sight. We're going to look at worldwide wine production data and define and use sets to compare information right in the view. And finally, we're going to look at online pricing data for household appliances. You heard that right. And leverage sets in that context to define relationships between fields in our table. Now, a fundamental concept we're going to touch on throughout this presentation is that of level of detail, a pretty loaded term in Tableau nomenclature. Fundamentally, level of detail is defining the granularity of your data. Right? If you have a transactional database, every transaction in that database defines uniquely a row. That is the LOD, the level of detail of that table. If we have a database that collects information from sensors every second from different locations, the combination of all those attributes, right, uniquely defines each row in that table. And that combination of attributes defines the level of detail of that table. So for example, in our first data set, right, the airplane data set, we have a table of people that have purchased a ticket, and we're looking at who has checked in or not 4 hours before the flight. In this table, we can uniquely identify each row by looking at the passenger ID column. Okay, so if you have a question about passengers, who has checked in or not, we can simply write a row level calculation or use that column called checked in of Boolean nature to find the passengers we care about, right? If we're trying to subset a field that is at the same level of detail as the table, LOD, then we don't really need nothing more than just a Boolean column. So let's see another question, right? And see how that maps to Tableau. So by the way, I'll be going underneath this podium once in a while, switching between my deck and Tableau. There's no hidden flask or anything under here, okay? All right, so Tableau. So same view, right? Simple crosstab showing me passenger IDs and whether they've checked in or not. Now, let's say my question is, who of the existing passengers are above 20 years old? All I have to do, that's a very simple question, all I have to do is write a row level calculation that returns true or false if people have an age above or below 20. And I can use that calculation directly in the view to segment, right, to bin passengers into 2 groups. So I can drop that in, right, and we return true or false, 0 or 1 for the ones we care about, right? I then have to use a set feature to find out which passengers are under or above 20 years old. Now, in our next data set, right, the worldwide wine production data, we're looking at this table where we have information at the country and the year level. So if I only look at the country column, I cannot uniquely identify a row in that table, right? The volume, in this case for each row, maps to a country and year value pair. So if I have a question about which countries have produced a lot of wine, a simple row-level calculation will not give me the answer, because a simple row-level calc will give me the answer at the country, year level. So maybe sets can help us here. Maybe sets can help us give us an answer. So before we jump into the workbook, I want to give a big shout out to two of our Zen masters, Andy Kriebel and Eva Murray, for making this dataset available in one of our Makeover Monday explorations in one of, I think, the week 40-something of 2016. So with that information, let's jump right in and see how we can use sets now to ask questions at the level we care about. So you have a simple viz showing worldwide wine production broken down by year, measured in the very intuitive units of million of hectoliters, which I think everybody in this room knows what this is. I'm not even going to go into further explanation. But because I'm pretty sure nobody does, actually, because I didn't know when I saw this data set, I'm going to leverage a conversion and say that 1 million hectoliters equates to about 40 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of volume. Okay, so since we all know what this means, let's use this as our measurement of comparison today. So I'm just going to drag this calculation that says number of Olympic-sized swimming pools on my columns. My length for each bar will not change, right? The same exact volume is represented per year, just my axes now reflect that new measurement. So I can see that, for example, in 2012, there were 10,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of wine produced all over the world. Right. So with that information, right, let's get to our first question. Let's say I want to find out, I know Italy produces a lot of wine. Let's see how much Italy produces every year. I'll use a country field from my schema and drop on the filter shelf and pick from this drop down here, Italy. Right, pretty simple. I see the view filtered down to Italian production of wine. That's awesome, right? But I have no clue how this compares to the overall production of wine at the year basis. Right? This may be a lot of wine compared to other countries, or just barely meeting the minimum. So maybe I can drop this field to the detail shelf and break down each bar per country, and maybe bring in the country field in my tooltip. And I can maybe hover over each mark and look for Italy. And there it is, right? So it looks like Italy is doing pretty well. But it would be amazing if I could simply define the set of countries I care about, right, and see them stand out right in context on my view. As Denny mentioned at Dave's on Stage keynote, right, sets will let me see things in context without filtering information outside my view. So let's create a set from the country field and call this set my countries. Pick Italy. And click OK. When I click OK, notice what happens. The set will get saved, it will get added to my data model right here. It will get stored in the schema viewer for me to use in any other worksheet that leverages that data source. Okay? So if I zoom out and use that set right in the view, maybe as a color indicator, I instantly see blue for all members in my set and gray for all members out of my set. I can even rearrange those pills and bring my set members on the leftmost side of each bar, and even edit the color, and of course use red because we're talking about wine.
Can you explain how this is different than creating the equivalent Boolean calculator field?
Yes, and I'll get through that through this presentation. Yeah, and the idea lies in this level of detail concept that I mentioned initially, right? Sets let us get answers to the level of the detail we care about, whereas row-level calculations give us answers at the row level of the table, which may not map to the LOD we're trying to subset. So let's go back to the presentation. By the way, right, I can add countries to my set. I can go here and say, well, also add Greece, my home country, right? And if I turn this to the left here and I hit apply, Tableau will add a new member to my set and show that individually in context, in my view. So what just happened? Let's go back to our deck and walk through this step by step. Initially, I used a filter to learn more about Italy, but this ended up removing all values, all rows, for which I have no value matching the Italy string. So from 120 marks, we ended up with 5 marks in the viz. When I use the set, right, we created this new column in our table. This new column that subsets the country field into 2 groups, right? Countries in my set and countries out of my set. So fundamentally, when we think about sets and filters, right, sets split a domain, a field, into 2 groups, members in and out. But a filter only keeps members in the view that are in that filter set. And I have great news for you. If you have already used filters before, you probably already know about 75% of how sets work. Let me explain. Back to Tableau. So here I have a viz, the exact same viz we started with. Over year, how much does Italy produce? Now, instead of creating a set from the data pane, from the country field, I'm going to create a set directly from the filter shelf. Notice this new option here, create set. This lets me save my filter, save a views filter in my data model. I'm going to call this my saved filter, and Italy is already in it. If I click OK, we see it get added in that corner right here. Now, I've saved that filter in my data source, and I can use that filter elsewhere in different worksheets for different reasons. For example, here, I'm looking at an area graph showing the trend of wine production for different countries. I can simply drop that saved filter now on this viz, see Italy over time, again, bring it to the bottom, change its color. And although I use that saved filter to filter the previous sheet, I'm using this saved filter in this viz to encode information right in the view. I can, of course, use it in different settings. I can filter maybe a map with my saved filter, right, to just Italy. And I can even have a filtered view of the equivalence we derive between million hectoliters and number of swimming pools that this volume can fit. I can drop my saved filter on here and see the Italian production in these 2 measurements. So fundamentally, right, if we look at all these examples, sorry, I had to use that wine glass, it was right there. So if we look at this example, right, we saw a set being used in different contexts, in different sheets that leverage a single data source. With one definition of the set through the entire data source, I can then go into any sheet I want, maybe the map, add a new country in that set. Notice this update this viz, but also update every other viz that leverages that set. So what just happened, right? If we look back to our deck, we started off saving our filter into a set, and that saving process stored our set in the data model. Then we were able to use that set to filter, to highlight, to do different things, right, at different sheets. It was easy, and we were able to maintain one single definition across all use cases. But instead of asking only questions that may be relevant to me, like I love Italy, I love France, right? We can evolve our questions and maybe ask questions about, big wine producers in the world. How do their production relate to other countries, right? So let's go back to the workbook and see how this can be done. Here I have a simple viz showing country for every year and the number of pools that country produced that year. So let's say that a lot of wine in the span of 2012 to 2016 is about 2,000 swimming pools. Okay, and I've defined that threshold here with this parameter. So a lot is 2,000. This is science. So I'm going to go over here, right, and I've created this row-level calculation called a lot of wine, which simply checks if the production at the row level, the production of Olympic-sized swimming pools, exceeds 2,000. So when I use that calculation in the view, Tableau is going to look at each row in our table and compare each row's values, like 472, 600, to 2000, and return true or false. Tableau's doing the right thing, but my question was a different type of question. I was looking for, hey, which countries produce a lot of wine in the span of 2012 to 2016? And I can tell that if I add these values over here together, they probably exceed 2,000. Maybe I can bring this pill to the left, but still, Argentina is out of my set. Argentina is considered a small wine producer. So that's where sets come in, right? Sets let us ask questions at the level we care about. Let's create a set from the country field and use all values in our field. Call this our big wine producers. And use the condition tab to tell Tableau, hey, Tableau, bin all countries in this set for which the sum of the Olympic-sized swimming pools that they generated worth of wine exceeds, a lot. My parameter, a lot, okay? So for each country, check that sum. If so, add it to my set. I'm going to save that set, gets added to my data modeler again, and I can bring that set right in the view. And notice that now Argentina is in, so is Australia, but Austria is out. Right? Tableau was able to calculate that sum at the level of detail I cared about and give me results where I wanted them. And I can use that set to learn more about that. I can use that set to see, okay, well, in the overall production of wine over these years, how much did my big wine producers contribute? I can drop that on color, and it looks like 84% of the worldwide wine production came from those big wine producers over that span of time. Again, let's look at what exactly happened in our deck. We started off with this very simple crosstab, which showed information at the row level of my primary table. And we wrote those calculations at the row level that checked whether the number exceeded 2,000. We got false for each of those row calculations, but fundamentally we were looking for the sum of those things and compare that sum to the threshold we cared about. So conceptually, when we were thinking about a question at the country level, we looked at all years for which that country had a production, summed those values, right? And if that sum exceeded 2,000, then that country was added into our set. We can ask more questions. For example, let's look at the top or bottom, top 3 countries by wine production and see how they compare to the total production from every other country in the world. So in Tableau, I have this viz here showing production of wine for that span of time for each country. Now I can use a filter to maybe find out which are the top 3 wine producers. I can drop my country field, use all values, right? Go to the top tab and specify my top. In this case, I can use n, and n is a parameter that I've been defining on the red side here. So as I change this, my set will change. So if I filter with this information, right, Tableau gives me the right values back. It gives me France, Italy, and Spain. But my question was, hey, how do each of these countries compare to the total wine production by countries not in that set? How does the Italian wine production compare to all other countries' production? So let's go back to our original viz without the filter and create a set this time using the top tab. I'm going to call this my top n producers, use all values in my field, and say get my top n countries by wine production. I'm going to save that set and bring it right in the view. Now Tableau segments my viz into 2 panes, right? Countries in and out. I can sort the viz so I see what's the ranking. And I can even change the parameter, this n value on the right side, to add more countries into my set. And I notice that the in-out pane differentiator updates. Okay, and I can bring this back to 3. Now my question was again, right, can I sum up all these values here and compare the sum of those to each individual country's production in my set? To answer this question, we're going to have to use sets and calculations, a very powerful tool. But I want to go to the deck first and explain how this works. How do sets and calculations actually function? A set has a true and false value, right? It has a 1 or a 0 value. And the most simple manifestation of a set used in a calculation is to translate a string, right? Define an alias for the members in versus the members out of my set. I don't know, I think this is called a hearty emoji, hearty, or heartier than the ghost emoji. But basically here I'm returning the heart emoji for countries that are in my set and the ghost emoji for countries out of my set. I'm checking each row in my table, and that row level calc returns the string I specify. Now I can omit the true equivalence because fundamentally a set is Boolean, has a true or false value. So if a country is in my set, if country set, then the equivalent emoji can be given back to me. So in our example, right, in the viz we're just seeing, we want to effectively return the country value for all members in my set and the string other for all countries out of my set. So we want to somehow use that set in calculation and tell Tableau, well, if a country is in my top n producers, then give me that country's value. Else, return other. Okay. So let's see this in action right in the workbook. And by the way, we'll be sending the workbook along after this talk, so don't feel the need to take a picture as I'm switching. I may be going too fast. So we'll give you this recording and the workbook after the conference for you to review. So we're here, and I've created this calculation for us called top countries and others. I'm going to uncomment the calc. And the exact same thing we showed in the deck is now in Tableau land. I can zoom out, save that set calculation, and bring it right into the view. Notice how Tableau has now returned each of the countries' value that are in my set in that column, and an others value for all countries out of my column. And as I update my set, as I change n, Tableau updates the set membership and updates the aliases that are now used in the viz. Okay. So now we can maybe remove the country pill from the view and get the answer we wanted. We can now see countries in my set individually and the summation of all other countries into one bar. I can even use that set on color to make it easier to decipher what's in and what's out, right? And again, I can change and see new countries get populated into my set. Sets and calculations let you dynamically update memberships and see information in context. So in this viz, which we've seen in the beginning of this presentation, we're looking at countries for each year. In this viz now I can bring in my top n producer set. I see the 3 bars, I see Italy, France, and Spain. And I can use calculations and sets to maybe reveal even further information. Maybe I want to label the marks that are in my set. So you have a set calc called label for set members that only returns the country value for members in my set and does nothing for members out, returns null, right? So if I use that calc now, that label calc, as a label in my viz, Tableau is going to show me a label for each set member. I can reduce the set's membership, and Tableau updates the labeling. I can even bring the set to the front and even sort the labels according to our sum of Olympic-sized swimming pools. Notice how when I hit apply, the marks get rearranged to reflect that sorting. Now the final question we can ask around comparisons, right, which is sets led us to quite easily and fluidly, is looking at context. So the table, the data source, doesn't contain any information on continents countries belong to or regions they belong to. But I have a question about how does the European yearly wine production compare to the production by the Americas? Right? How do I get this question? How do I know to bin countries into groups that belong to certain continents? Well, sets to the rescue, right? So here I have a map showing all of my countries that produce wine. Now, instead of creating a set from the schema viewer or the filter shelf, I can create a set directly from the view. I'm going to go over here and lasso select all those countries and create set. And I can call this set, the Americas, right? I'll save the set in my schema viewer, and I'll go ahead and create another set, including all European countries. I can even add or remove members to a set. Here I can actually add Romania to the set, Europe, if I forgot to add one in my original selection. So now we have the sets of countries that belong in each region. So what? Right? How do we compare the wine production between these two continents? Well, we're going to look at this viz about countries first, and maybe use, right, we can bring in the number of pools produced by country in the view. And maybe use a filter, maybe use the Americas set as a filter to only show production for those countries. So we get what we expected. But there's no way for me to compare now those values to European values, right? There's no way for me to see those two filtered results in the same view using a filter. So maybe I can use the set in a calculation to conditionally return wine production for either set. I'm going to remove the filter, and I've defined here two calculations. Production for Europe, which simply tells Tableau, hey Tableau, if a country is in the European set, then give me the production of wine for those countries, else return 0. So for all non-European countries, give me 0. I'm going to save that set calculation. If I bring it in the view, notice how I get values for European countries and I get zeros for non-European countries. And I'll do the exact same thing for the Americas. I have the exact same calc, this time checking if countries belong in that set, else return 0. I'm going to save that calculation and also bring it into the view. Again, we notice that Tableau is filtering at the column level, not the sheet level. It's picking which values to return when. And now if I look at this viz at the year level, I can use these calculations directly in the view by double-clicking. And I can see the overall production of European wine and wine from the Americas in a single viz. I didn't have to get rid of data, right, for each continent. I could just see both at the same time. And of course, I can get fancy, right? I can look at this over time in a better visualization, bring in production for Europe in my viz, bring in the Americas, and also define the difference between these two lines. This difference calc simply says, look at the sum of production for each continent at any given year, at any given member of the viz LOD, sum those up and subtract them. So this will give me a line that shows me that for each year, the production from Europe tends to be significantly more, and actually the trend is increasing over time. So with sets, we're able to use information, filter information at different levels in the same viz, and get actionable insights out of that. So I'm sure we all love wine, but after, a wine night, there's always cleaning involved. And I hope we all care about cleaning in this room, because our next data set is going to be about online pricing data for different household appliances. Vacuums, hand dryers, hair dryers, fans, you name it. Now, the reason I use this data set for this presentation is because I think it's a phenomenal data set that you can all have access to. It's from this UK startup called Price Searcher. And what they do is they scrape the web. They scrape the web for different merchants, different online retailers, and how they price their products. And then you can use that information to learn more about how your pricing should vary between different merchants, how you can buy products that are cheaper in some areas. And for our scenarios, I'm going to keep that data set filtered down to 2 brands. I'm going to look at Hoover and Dyson, 2 household appliances brands. But before we jump into the set-specific examples, I want to show you just some examples of how you can leverage that data set. So back to Tableau. So first things you can do, you can look at, okay, let's look at how the listings per merchant vary on the web. Of course, Amazon is offering a lot of products, 7,000 almost. And then OnBuy is next, and Frugo comes after that. So it's a pretty simple viz, but you can ask more complicated questions as you go. Maybe you want to look at the average price per product throughout the entire web, and maybe color that by the brand. So for example, here I'm looking at Dyson and Dyson and Hoover products. And it looks like, I was surprised to learn that, but hand dryers are extremely expensive, almost $2,000. And it looks like Dyson is the premium brand in that space. Now, we can get even more interesting results by looking at the average price over time for all products from each merchant. We look at here, for example, Amazon. Their average price is significantly lower compared to any other merchant on the web. And that's probably because there's a lot of accessories on their website that are very low priced. Whereas, for example, Air.com, we're looking at an extreme deviation between the pricing for Dyson and Hoover products recently. My final favorite example from this data set is extremely interesting because it looks at price wars. So how do different merchants compete on the web? How frequently do they change their prices over time? So here I'm looking at 2 products from Dyson, the Dyson V7 Motorhead and the Dyson V8 Absolute. And how different merchants, Dyson's official website and Amazon's website, are selling this product. And I'm looking at the y-axis, the number of price movements each of those websites perform each month. So for example, we're looking at March of this year. Dyson adjusted their price 5 times, but Amazon has changed their price 19 times that month. Their average price is the same, but we notice, for example, for the Dyson V8, that Dyson has less price movements for a cheaper product on average related to Amazon's same movements over the same month. So again, a sneak peek on what this could be, right? We're going to look now how we can leverage sets to answer questions in that data set. So the first example we're going to look at is understand how to use sets to build cohorts. So let's say I'm interested in finding out how many merchants sell Dyson products, how many merchants sell Hoover products, or how many merchants sell both. So my first instinct is to use a filter and say, oh, you know what? Give me all Dyson products by keeping only those values, okay? I'm going to keep only, and maybe I can zoom down right here and look that we have 82 rows, so probably 82 merchants only sell Dyson. But I can't find who sold Hoover or who sold both, right? A subset of those merchants in this view sell both. So they truly are not belonging in the set of merchants only selling Dyson. So how do we get this answer? Well, how do you think? Sets. Oh my God, okay. So the first step is to define a row level calc that's going to look at the brand. So if we want to define merchants based on the brand, right? Who sells what? So I have this very simple calc here at the row level again that says if my brand equals Dyson, give me true, else false. I'm going to bring this calc right in the view, and Tableau does exactly what I wanted it to do. It gives me a 0 for Hoover brands and a 1 for Dyson brands. All right? Now, obviously, alza.co.uk sells both brands, and Allianz sells only Dyson. So they both are Dyson merchants. So how do we get that answer at the merchant level? Well, we're going to use that row level calculation and aggregate that information at the merchant. So if I create a set from the merchant field that I've done here for us, where I'm looking for merchants selling Dyson, I'm using all values in my merchant set, and I'm conditioning those using my row level calculation, but I'm wrapping that with a max function. What this does is it says, okay, Tableau, look at the level of the merchant. For every merchant, go and look at each row. If this Dyson row level calc returns true at least one time, this means that that merchant is a Dyson merchant. So if I use that in the view, Tableau gives me in for merchants that have at least one. That's such a bad way. One true. And out for the ones that only have 0, only have Hoover as our brand they're selling. So if we go back to our deck and look at this more schematically, we started with this simple table of merchant and brand combinations. Here we have 1 row for Alliance, 2 for Amazon, 1 for Appliance City. We wrote this row level calculation to return true or false if the brand is Dyson. But then the question was at the merchant level. So we had to aggregate that information to the merchant column. So we used this max function that said, okay, well, look at the merchant. So for Alliance, max of 1 is 1. Look at all rows for Amazon. So max of 1 or 0 is 1. And look at the final one, Appliance City. If the value is 0, the max of 0 is 0. Therefore, we're able to classify those merchants as Dyson merchants or non-Dyson merchants. Now, the exact same process can be followed to find out Hoover merchants, right? So how would we do this? In Tableau, I'm going to create a set from the merchant field. I'm going to call this merchants that sell Hoover. I'm going to use all values in this field and condition that with the max of a Hoover calculation, And this is the exact thing that the Dyson calculation did. It solely checks if the brand is Hoover, return true. So I'm going to save that set. So now I'm getting closer. I'm able to classify now merchant groups that sell Dyson, merchant groups that sell Hoover. But how do I find out merchants that sell both? Maybe sets can help out. I'm getting cheesy here. Basically, we're going to go here and create a combined set from the 2 merchant sets. Because both of those sets come from the same field, merchant, we can leverage Tableau's set functions to say, well, give me members that are either the intersection of those 2 sets, the union, the left join, the right join. So here, in this view, I can say, these are going to be the merchants that sell both Hoover and Dyson. And this is going to be the shared members in both sets, right? Because Amazon, for instance, will be belonging both in the merchant sets for Dyson and for Hoover. So I'm going to save that set. I'm going to zoom out. This has been added to my data model. And now I can use those sets in a calculation to define my cohorts. I can tell Tableau now, okay, look at every row. And let me uncomment this calc so we can look at it together. Of course, rename this because typing in a live audience doesn't always work. There we go. So now I'm telling Tableau, hey Tableau, look at your table. And for each row that you got a true value for merchants selling both Dyson and Hoover, give me this alias called both brands. If you have a true statement for just a set that contains Dyson merchants, give me Dyson only. else give me Hoover only. So I'm going to zoom out and use that calc directly in the view. Now I'm going to fit this to the entire view. Now I'm able to, first of all, I've split a domain into 3 groups without filtering only one information out. And now I can use the merchant field to find out how many merchants belong in each cohort. I can maybe size each bar with count distinct of 1 because each square is 1 merchant. So we do see that actually we have most merchants on the web selling both brands. But I can get more answers. I can look at maybe the product number those merchants sell. I can go here and pull product name on color and use count distinct to find out the distinct product listings for each merchant in each cohort. Easily we can find an outlier. There's Amazon. We can also use that calculation as a label, and boom. Simple cohort analysis using sets based on the same field. So we looked at defining cohorts as a way to leverage sets to infer and leverage relationships between fields. Another awesome example is to define baskets, right? Let's say I'm looking at buying hand dryers, but I'm curious to find out what other products merchants that sell hand dryers also sell. And maybe I can find out the cheapest deal for me if I want to find a vacuum in that website after all. So how does this work? Again, right, the first instinct may be to use a filter. So here in this view, I have merchants and categories. And my question was, okay, let's find out what other things merchants that sell hand dryers also sell. Maybe I can filter at the hand dryers level and keep only that value. But now Tableau gives me the merchants that I probably want to look at, but I have no sense of telling what other things those merchants are selling. My question was at the merchant level, but I filtered at the category level. So maybe I want to use a filter at the category level to condition a merchant set. What I've done, let's walk through this together. I'm going to remove this filter, back to our original view. I've created a category set here that only includes one category, hair dryers in this case. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to use that set to define a merchant set. A merchant set that's going to contain all merchants that sell hair dryers, but may also sell other things. So in the merchant field, I created a set that I'm going to call merchants that sell, category X. I'm going to use all values in the field and condition that domain with, again, using the max function. I'm going to condition that by saying, okay, for every merchant, if you got at least one true row for the category specified, so if the merchants sell at least hair dryers, maybe they sell more, maybe they just sell hair dryers, then put those merchants in my set. Right? I can leverage relationships between fields, between columns in our table to further subset the information I can find answers about. So I can zoom out, save that set, and notice what happens when I bring that set as a filter in my view. Now Tableau returns all merchants that sell hair dryers. We see this because this column is having data for every single row. But now I can see also what other things those merchants are selling. Of course, I can remove the nulls if I don't care about them, but I'm going to keep these for now in the view. And maybe you can add things to your category set. You may want to find out, well, okay, for categories that are hair dryers or hand dryers, what other things do those merchants sell? By updating that set, Tableau updates your view and returns all rows for which you have at least one data point for the hand dryer or the hair dryer column. Some rows may have values for both, some for just one. So the final example we're going to look at involves combination of sets. So we started off by looking at cohorts through combined sets based on the same field. And Tableau gave us the option for that. Now, a very common business question is to ask questions about parts of your data that are not from the same field. For example, let's say I want to find out, cheap products, cheap vacuum products. So I want to find out what products are either cheap vacuum products or sold by merchants that have given me a discount coupon. I've defined here two sets, cheap vacuum products and merchants that have given me a coupon. But Tableau doesn't give me an option to combine those two sets. And the reason for that is because Tableau only lets you combine sets that are based on the same dimension. On the left side, that implies merchants. So how can we create that combined set? Well, we can use sets in calculations, again, and get our answer. And I call this example an OR filter, because Tableau lets us now conditionally retrieve information at the row level without ending information from the filter shelf. So here I've defined a low price, it's going to be $50, based on which I'm defining all cheap vacuum products that belong in this set right here. So this set is all vacuum products that satisfy the condition vacuums and are priced under $50. Okay? So if I use that set in the view as a filter, I do note that I have three options in this data set to buy from. Dyson docking station, power supply, vacuum cleaner, and so on. Now, I'm also curious to find out the products merchants that have given me a discount coupon also sell, because I may want to use that coupon, right? So I have defined this other set here, merchants with discount coupons. That is an arbitrary set that I have two manufacturers in, Boswell and somebody else. Now let's bring that set in the view, again as a filter, to maybe find the combination of those two. Well, what happened? Right, Tableau removed all information from my view. That is because there's no single row that satisfies both of those sets. There's no single row that is a cheap vacuum product and sold by a merchant that is offering me a coupon. My question is not and though, it's or. I'm looking for either cheap products or products from merchants that have given me a discount coupon. Unfortunately, filters in Tableau are intersected, are ANDed together. So you have to be clever and remove the sets from the filter shelf and instead define this calculation that I've called an OR filter. And all this does is says, give me back the rows for which I have members in at least one of those two sets. If a row is a cheap vacuum product or offered by this merchant, then give it back to me. So if I use this calculation now as a filter in my viz and return only the true results for that calculation, boom, right? I see 28 rows, 28 options of super expensive products that are provided by a merchant with a discount coupon, but also my original information, right? We have here the, I believe it was this one. No, I think that was it, right? The original cheap vacuum product that was originally offered. And of course, I can change my threshold parameter to adjust that condition. So again, what happened, right? Filters always AND. We always get back the intersection of the conditions specified in the filter shelf. Whereas with sets, we can define OR filters. Filters that give us the union of two domains that we may be interested in. So with that, we kind of wrapped up the last example of using sets to define and use relationships in our data to answer more questions. We use sets to compare information in the view, see information right in the context of our data, and also use sets to define other sets, or use parameters to define other sets. Now, of course, sets are in many more places in Tableau. That's why it said in the beginning it's going to be your soon-to-be favorite feature. I hope that's the case after you leave the session. We use sets to power our action framework. So a way you visually define a filter in Tableau is using an action set in the background to filter information in your viz. We use sets, hidden sets, to filter using the keep only and exclude option, and we use also hidden sets to power our vision tooltip feature. that was shipped earlier this year. We also use sets to define user filters, ways for you to conditionally return data on server depending on who's logged in, who's looking at the viz you may have published. I will not go over these in this presentation, but I really encourage you to check them out on our online resources. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to stick around for more questions after the session, and of course via email, Twitter, any way you want me to. So I'll leave you with this quote. I'm meeting Lorna this week. She's one of our Tableau public ambassadors, a phenomenal Tableau user. And when I saw that tweet, I was like, wow, that's actually how I felt when I first joined Tableau. I would keep using filters, keep using parameters, but eventually I always forgot how powerful sets can be to filter information, to compare information, to relate information. So I encourage you to never forget how sets can be powerful for your own analysis. If you're interested in this is not happening. If we can go back in time, this could happen, but this was today's session. Well, if you are interested in looking for more stuff around sets, I'm giving another talk, an advanced talk on using sets to answer common business questions. So cohort analysis, customer segmentation, market basket analysis, different ways you can use sets to get more insights out of your data. And also Bethany Lyons, one of the best Tableau employees we've had, a sales consultant, is giving a talk on the new feature that was just presented at Devs on Stage, Set Actions, where you can use actions to select visually what members are in your set. Please take the time to complete the survey. I'm really looking forward for feedback to improve the session for next year. I really appreciate that. And please, please, please reach out. Don't be shy. I love getting emails and tweets from you guys. So with any questions you may have, you want to troubleshoot workbooks, I'm here to do that with you. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.